I didn't catch my girlfriend cheating by tracking her location or scrolling through her phone at 3 in the morning like some paranoid stereotype. I found out because of a single message that appeared where it didn't belong, at a moment when I still believed my life was stable. I was 25, living in a small town in northern Pennsylvania where people don't really leave and secrets rarely stay buried for long. My girlfriend Hannah and I had been together a little over 2 years. Not the dramatic, all-consuming kind of relationship, but steady, predictable, the kind people around us described as solid. That night, we were on the couch watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to. Hannah fell asleep first, her phone resting on the armrest between us. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious yet. I was just tired. Then her phone lit up. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even lean closer. I saw the preview out of the corner of my eye. I missed last night already. No name. No emojis. Just that. For a few seconds, my brain refused to assign meaning to the words. I told myself it could be a friend, a coworker, something harmless taken out of context. When you love someone, denial doesn't feel dishonest. It feels protective. But once doubt shows up, it doesn't leave quietly. Hannah shifted in her sleep, turned her head toward me, completely unaware. I turned the phone face down and told myself I wouldn't think about it again. That lasted maybe an hour. After she went to bed, I stayed in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen like it might give me answers. I hated myself for what I did next, but I hated uncertainty more. I unlocked her phone. The conversation wasn't explicit. That was the part that hurt the most. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was comfortable, familiar. References to inside jokes I didn't recognize. Mentions of time spent together that I hadn't been part of. This wasn't a mistake. This was ongoing. I felt strangely calm as I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. No shaking, no panic, just a hollow awareness spreading through my chest. I sat there until the sky started to lighten outside. In the morning, Hannah woke up like nothing had happened. She kissed my shoulder, asked if I wanted eggs or cereal, complained about being tired. Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't hesitate. That was when the realization really landed. She wasn't panicking because she wasn't afraid of being caught. She thought she was in control. And sitting there at the kitchen table, pretending everything was normal, I understood something I hadn't before. Whatever I thought our relationship was, it had already ended. I just hadn't been told yet. The hardest part about discovering the truth wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the waiting. Every day after that message felt like I was carrying a weight no one else could see, moving through routines that suddenly felt fake. Hannah didn't change. Or maybe she never needed to. She talked about work like usual, complained about traffic, told me her plans for the weekend with the same casual certainty she always had. If there was guilt, it didn't reach the surface. Watching her felt like watching someone act in a play I hadn't realized I was attending. I kept telling myself I needed proof. Real proof. Something undeniable. As if what I'd already seen wasn't enough. It came sooner than I expected. A few days later, I ran into Mark, a guy I'd known since high school, at a gas station just outside town. We made the usual small talk. Weather, work, nothing important. As we were about to leave, he hesitated. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "This might not be my place, but I saw Hannah last weekend." My stomach tightened. He told me he'd seen her at a local brewery downtown, sitting close to a guy he didn't recognize. Not just talking, touching, laughing in a way that didn't leave much room for interpretation. I thanked him and got into my car without saying much else. The drive home felt longer than it ever had. Every familiar street suddenly felt foreign. That night, I didn't wait. I asked her directly who she'd been seeing. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding how much truth I deserved. Then she sighed and sat down across from me, folding her hands in her lap. She said she'd been confused, that things had been off between us, that she hadn't meant for it to go this far. I asked how long. She didn't answer right away. That pause said more than any confession could have. When she finally spoke, the number of months felt unreal, like she was talking about someone else's life. We didn't argue. There was no shouting. Just two tired people acknowledging something that couldn't be repaired. She packed a bag that night. Said she'd stay with a friend. When the door closed behind her, the apartment went silent in a way that felt permanent. In a small town, news moves faster than healing. Within days, people started asking questions. Some were careful, others weren't. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't defend myself. I didn't defend her either. I was too tired. All I knew was that pretending had hurt more than the truth ever could. And now that pretending was over, I had no idea who I was supposed to be next. After Hannah moved out, my world shrank. Not all at once, but in quiet, practical ways. One less toothbrush by the sink. Empty drawers. Nights that stretched longer than they used to. I started staying late at work for no real reason, just to delay going home to an apartment that felt unfinished. That's how I ended up at the public library on a Wednesday evening. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed a place that didn't expect me to be okay. The library had always been like that, quiet, neutral, uninterested in your personal problems. I wandered through the aisles until I realized I'd been staring at the same shelf for several minutes. "Can I help you find something?" Her voice was calm, professional, but not cold. She was shelving books, hair pulled back, glasses sliding down her nose like they didn't quite belong there. Her name tag read Erin. I told her I was looking for a book I couldn't remember the title of. She smiled, not amused, just patient, and asked a few questions. Somehow we found it. That should have been the end of it. Instead, we talked. At first about books, then about how strange it is to grow up in a place and still feel like you don't fully belong to it. She mentioned she'd moved back to town after being away for years. I mentioned I'd never left. There was no flirting, no awkward energy, just conversation that didn't feel like it needed a purpose. Before I left, she asked if I came to the library often. I said no. She nodded, like she'd expected that. The next week, I went back. This time, she asked if I'd finished the book. I hadn't. We talked anyway. Then we grabbed coffee from the cafe across the street. That's when I learned she was 35. She said it plainly, like it wasn't a big deal. I told her my age. She raised an eyebrow, thoughtful, not judgmental. "Is that a problem?" I asked. "Only if you think it is," she said. That answer stayed with me. We started meeting intentionally after that. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into long conversations that lasted until the sky got dark. She didn't ask why my relationship ended. She didn't push. Eventually, I told her. Not all of it. Just enough. She listened without interrupting, without offering advice, without turning my story into a lesson. When I finished, she nodded once. "That sounds painful," she said. No pity. No anger on my behalf. Just understanding. I realized then how rare it is to feel heard without being analyzed. And how dangerous that can be. Because once someone sees you like that, it becomes harder to hide from yourself. And I was just starting to understand what that meant. Spending time with Erin didn't feel like moving on. It felt like slowing down enough to catch my breath. There was no sense of urgency between us, no pressure to define what we were becoming. She seemed comfortable letting things exist as they were, without trying to force meaning onto them. That was new for me. Most of my past relationships had followed an invisible script: meet, attach, accelerate. With Erin, the pace was different. Deliberate. Almost careful. At first, I worried that meant disinterest. Over time, I realized it meant intention. We settled into a rhythm. Coffee after work. Walks through the park near the river. Sitting on benches, watching people pass without feeling the need to comment on them. Sometimes we talked about heavy things. Other times, nothing important at all. One evening, as we sat in her car after dinner, the conversation faded into a comfortable silence. The air felt charged, but neither of us moved. Erin glanced at me, then away, giving me space rather than taking it. When I leaned in, it wasn't impulsive. It was a decision. The kiss was unhurried, gentle, like we were both checking in with ourselves as much as with each other. When we pulled back, she smiled softly. "We don't have to rush," she said. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until she said it. As weeks passed, I noticed how differently Erin handled conflict and uncertainty. If something bothered her, she said so calmly. If she didn't know how she felt yet, she admitted it. There were no games, no strategic silences meant to provoke a reaction. One night, I asked her why she was so patient with me. She thought about it for a moment. "Because I've learned what happens when you ignore your instincts," she said. "And I don't want to do that again." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Around that time, I started noticing changes outside our bubble. Familiar faces at the grocery store lingering a little longer. Conversations cutting off when I walked into a room. In a town this small, patterns don't go unnoticed. Erin noticed it too. "People are curious," she said one afternoon. "That's normal. Does it bother you?" I asked. She shook her head. I stopped living for other people's comfort a long time ago. That confidence was quiet, not performative. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about not needing to. Standing next to her, I started to feel something shift inside me. Not just healing, but recalibration. Like I was relearning what healthy connection actually looked like. I didn't know it yet, but that steadiness, her experience, her calm, was about to change more than just how I felt. It was about to change how the entire story unfolded. In a small town, attention doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in slowly, like fog. At first, I barely noticed it. A glance held a second too long. A pause in conversation when Erin and I walked by. Nothing obvious enough to call out, but enough to feel. People had started connecting dots. Erin and I never tried to hide what we were doing, but we didn't advertise it either. We showed up together sometimes. Other times we didn't. There was no announcement, no explanation offered. That alone seemed to confuse people. I started hearing Hannah's name again, not from her, but from others. "She's been asking about you," someone said casually, like they were commenting on the weather. "I think she didn't expect you to move on so fast," someone else added. The truth was, I hadn't moved on quickly. I just moved on quietly. Erin noticed the shift before I fully processed it. One night, as we sat on her porch, she asked, "Has she reached out to you?" I shook my head. "Not directly." Erin nodded, like that confirmed something she already suspected. "What?" I asked. "She's trying to understand a version of events where she's still central," Erin said. "That's common." I thought about that longer than I expected to. A week later, I ran into Hannah at the grocery store. It was unavoidable. Same aisle. Same moment of recognition. She looked surprised, then guarded. We exchanged polite hellos. Nothing more. But as I walked away, I felt her watching me. Not with anger. With confusion. Later that night, Erin and I went out to a small bar on the edge of town. Quiet place. Low lights. Somewhere people went to disappear rather than be seen. Hannah walked in halfway through her drinks. This time, there was no pretending not to notice. She sat across the room with someone I didn't recognize, laughing a little too loudly, checking her phone more than once. Erin leaned toward me. "Do you want to leave?" she asked. I looked around. The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago. Then I looked at Erin. Calm, present, unbothered. "No," I said. "I'm okay." We stayed. We talked. We ordered another drink. We didn't look in Hannah's direction again. That night, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even hurt. Seeing her didn't reopen anything. It just confirmed how far I'd already moved. On the drive home, Erin was quiet. "Thank you for asking earlier," I said. She glanced at me. "I wasn't asking because of her," she said. "I was asking because of you." That difference mattered. Back home, word traveled the way it always does. People noticed we'd stayed. They noticed we were steady. They noticed I wasn't reacting. And in a town where reactions are currency, my calm was worth more than any explanation. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that everyone felt it. It didn't take long before the small ripples of attention turned into something more tangible. Hannah's carefully constructed image of herself, the girl everyone admired for being charming, likable, untouchable, started to wobble. It began subtly. Casual conversations with mutual friends that ended awkwardly. Comments she made about plans that didn't include me anymore. People she thought she could trust quietly telling different stories. Erin didn't suggest we do anything. She just observed, as if she already knew how it would unfold. I learned to do the same. One afternoon, Mark, the guy who had unknowingly confirmed Hannah's earlier indiscretion, mentioned that Hannah had tried to reach him again. He'd brushed her off. She hadn't expected that. In a town this small, word spread quickly. I ran into Hannah a few days later while grabbing lunch. She looked different, tired, restless, like she'd been performing a version of herself for too long. She tried to smile, tried to bridge the gap with conversation, but the awkwardness was palpable. "You're moving on fast," she said. Not as a question, more like a statement. I shrugged. "I've been busy." She searched for a reaction, a sign that her words landed. I gave her nothing. Walking away that afternoon, I realized the first domino had already fallen. Hannah's world, the one where she controlled perception and dictated narratives, was starting to unravel, but without me lifting a finger. Erin was right. Consequences didn't need to be manufactured. They unfolded naturally when truth aligned with reality. Later that night, Erin and I went for a walk along the river. The air was cold but clear. I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks, genuinely. "You don't need to say anything," she said softly. "People notice patterns. They notice when someone is authentic, even if they don't realize it immediately." I nodded, understanding what she meant. Authenticity was something Hannah had never mastered. She had relied on charm, on control, on selective truths. Now that structure was crumbling quietly on its own. In the following weeks, I noticed subtle changes around town. Conversations shifted when she entered a room. Invitations went elsewhere. People whispered less, but they noticed more. The funny thing was, I didn't feel satisfaction. Not really. There was no gloating, no sense of victory. Instead, I felt relief. Relief that I had moved forward. Relief that Erin and I were building something steady, real, and unshakable. That's when I realized the most powerful kind of revenge doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from living your life authentically while the world adjusts around someone who failed to do the same. And that calm, quiet shift, the one Erin and I didn't orchestrate, was more effective than any plan I could have conceived. Sometimes, the first domino doesn't fall with a crash. It just tilts, and everything else follows naturally. Over the next few weeks, Hannah's efforts to regain control became increasingly transparent. She tried explaining herself to friends, attempting to rewrite her narrative. But in a town this small, inconsistencies are noticed immediately. People whispered quietly, compared stories, and realized the version she was selling didn't match reality. I didn't involve myself. I didn't respond to rumors, clarify anything, or correct her version. I didn't need to. Watching the consequences unfold on their own felt strangely satisfying, and far less exhausting than confrontation would have been. One evening, Erin and I went for a late drive, taking the back roads just outside town. The air smelled like winter and wet leaves, and the quiet hum of the car felt like the only thing that existed. "I noticed people have been talking," I said quietly. She glanced at me, calm as ever. "They always do. That's small towns. But they're noticing the truth, not you." I realized she was right. The discomfort wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Hannah, at the person she'd portrayed herself to be versus the person who actually existed. The next time I ran into her in public, she was with someone new, a man I didn't recognize. She tried to smile when she saw me. I returned a simple nod, no more, no less. The look she gave, an almost imperceptible mix of frustration and disbelief, told me everything. She expected a reaction, a confrontation, a scene. She expected validation of her power over me. But there was none. Erin and I kept walking. We didn't need to respond. The town would notice Hannah's crumbling image without our interference. That's the point I started understanding. True closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from detachment, from letting people face the consequences of their actions without being a part of the theatrics. One night, I caught myself laughing genuinely for the first time since everything fell apart. Erin had made a joke about a bookstore cat she'd seen the day before. I realized I wasn't thinking about Hannah. I wasn't worrying about gossip. I was just living. It felt alien, healthy, empowering. When you watch the fallout without participating, you see patterns others might miss. People begin to take responsibility for themselves, even without meaning to. And slowly, quietly, your world stabilizes. Hannah continued to try to assert her version of events, but it didn't stick. Friends noticed contradictions, stories fell apart, and her attempts to control perception failed. Erin and I didn't need to intervene. That was the most profound lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't active. It's passive. It's patience. It's living well while truth does the work for you. By the time the snow began to fall over our small town, the tension that had followed Hannah for weeks had faded. People noticed. But more importantly, I noticed I was no longer tethered to past pain, no longer consumed by the betrayal. I was free. And freedom, I realized, was far more powerful than revenge. By this point, the pattern was undeniable. Hannah's careful web of influence, the image she'd curated for years, had begun to crumble quietly, without any intervention from me. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't need to. Life and truth had a way of correcting themselves, especially when the illusion was fragile. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontations, no public callouts. Just small moments of observation that, when added together, revealed the cracks. Friends noticed contradictions. Plans shifted without her input. Invitations she expected never came. The town, like always, was paying attention. Erin noticed too. She didn't comment, didn't gloat, didn't push me toward satisfaction. She just observed. Her calmness grounded me. Her experience in life, in relationships, in handling conflict quietly, made me realize that revenge doesn't need to be active. One evening, I saw Hannah at a local cafe with a new friend. She smiled a little too brightly, laughed a little too loudly, and checked her phone repeatedly. I didn't look at her. I focused on Erin, who sat across from me, her presence steady and reassuring. "She's trying to control what she can," Erin said softly. "You don't need to be part of it." Her words echoed in my mind later that night. That was the moment I fully understood the difference between acting on anger and living truthfully. One requires effort, confrontation, and risk. The other requires patience, detachment, and consistency. Hannah's attempts to influence perception were futile because the people around her were witnessing the truth firsthand. Her charm and selective honesty could only carry her so far. Without my reaction, without an audience actively defending her version, her constructed image faltered naturally. I started seeing the changes everywhere. Mutual friends were more careful in her presence. Conversations cut short. Invitations omitted her. People in town weren't cruel. They just noticed patterns and adjusted accordingly. Erin and I didn't participate in gossip. We didn't need to. We lived our lives steadily. Our connection grew stronger, deeper, rooted in honesty and shared understanding rather than drama. One snowy evening, as we walked home, Erin linked her arm with mine. The world around us felt quiet, serene, and for the first time in months, my chest felt light. I realized the power of calm, of patience, and of simply being authentic while life runs its course. Revenge, I learned, isn't about causing suffering. It's about letting reality reveal itself while you grow in its wake. Watching someone unravel quietly, not because of your direct actions, but because of the choices they made, is far more effective and far more peaceful than any confrontation or argument could ever be. By the time the first snow covered the streets, Hannah's influence in our small town had diminished. Her attempts to regain attention went unnoticed, her carefully crafted persona fading without effort from anyone except herself. Erin squeezed my hand, and I realized something important. In the end, the most satisfying form of revenge isn't about making someone else hurt. It's about reclaiming your own life, living fully, building something meaningful, and letting the consequences fall into place naturally. I had imagined that once Hannah's misdeeds became clear, I would feel a rush of vindication. A moment where I could finally say, she got what she deserved. I had pictured confrontation, maybe even some dramatic recognition of her mistakes. None of that happened. Instead, what I felt was quieter, more profound. Relief, freedom, space to breathe. I realized that what I gained wasn't about her. It was about me. For months, I had carried the weight of her lies and betrayal like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every thought about my future, every plan I made, seemed tethered to her presence. Now, without that burden, life felt lighter. Erin and I had settled into a rhythm that didn't feel rushed. The relationship wasn't about filling voids or seeking revenge. It was about connection, mutual respect, and patience. She never pressured me to share every detail, never judged my past, never tried to hurry healing. Just steady presence. That steadiness became a foundation I hadn't known I needed. I noticed small changes within myself. I laughed more easily. I slept better. I started taking walks without checking my phone every few minutes. My friends noticed the difference too. I was no longer defined by the betrayal, no longer labeled as the guy she cheated on. I was just me. Hannah did reach out one last time. A brief message, almost like a postcard from someone who had been part of my life and now wasn't. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain herself. She just acknowledged my existence. I read it, considered replying, then closed the message. No anger. No lingering resentment. Just finality. Erin asked me later if I felt bad about not responding. No, I said. I feel done. And that's when I truly understood the difference between revenge and closure. Revenge seeks to punish. Closure seeks to release. I had spent months in the former, but what I needed was the latter. In letting go, I also realized the lessons betrayal had forced upon me. I became more cautious, yes, but not cynical. I became better at noticing red flags, at trusting my instincts. I learned the value of honesty, patience, and observing life without trying to control every outcome. The town moved on, as it always does. New stories replaced old ones. People adjusted to the truths they observed. Hannah faded into background noise, a memory that occasionally surfaced but no longer shaped my daily life. Erin and I didn't celebrate this silently unraveling drama. We just continued living, building a connection based on trust, understanding, and presence. By the time winter had fully settled over our small town, I understood what I had truly gained. Not revenge, not satisfaction, not validation, freedom, peace, and the ability to create a life rooted in authenticity, not retribution. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt genuinely, undeniably free. I used to think life's endings were supposed to feel conclusive. A final scene, a tidy moral, a sense that everything had resolved. But real endings rarely arrive that way. They blur into beginnings quietly, almost imperceptibly, and sometimes, the most significant changes happen in that silence. By the time winter's first snow had melted and spring was creeping in, Erin and I had settled into a life that felt grounded and real. Not perfect, of course. We argued sometimes, disagreed, had stressful days. But it was the kind of life where disagreements didn't erode trust, where moments of tension didn't threaten the foundation we were building together. I stopped thinking about Hannah, not because I forced it, but because she no longer had any power over my thoughts, my decisions, or my emotional state. She existed in the past, a story I had lived through, not the person I was living for anymore. We spent evenings cooking together, walking along the river, sitting in cafes, and reading in quiet corners. There was laughter, small gestures of care, and long conversations that didn't need to impress anyone. Erin didn't replace what I had lost. She offered something different, something better, stability, experience, and an example of emotional honesty that I hadn't realized I needed. I thought back to the idea of revenge, the feeling of wanting to make someone pay for the hurt they caused. Looking back now, it seems almost childish. What I gained wasn't in punishment or in seeing Hannah falter. What I gained was in reclaiming my life, in learning that true satisfaction comes not from hurting someone else, but from repairing yourself and building something meaningful. Sometimes, when we drive through town, I notice people's reactions. A glance, a whisper, a nod. I know they've noticed. They've noticed that I've moved on, that I'm no longer weighed down by the past, that I've found someone who matches me in patience, honesty, and steadiness. I don't feel triumph. I feel clarity. Erin and I talk about the past rarely, only when it serves reflection, not nostalgia. We focus on what we're creating together, on trust, on shared experiences, on the quiet joy of being in each other's presence without games or pretense. One night, sitting on her porch watching the stars, I realized something. Betrayal had forced me to confront my weaknesses, my assumptions, and my fears. It had shown me who I was when the world wasn't bending to my expectations. And in that reflection, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. The life I had rebuilt wasn't flashy or dramatic. It wasn't built on proving anyone wrong. It was built on authenticity, honesty, and patience. And that, I realized, is the only ending that truly lasts. Because in the quiet aftermath of betrayal, when you stop reacting and start living, you don't just survive, you thrive. I had survived. I had thrived. And finally, the life I lived felt entirely my own.